Imagine living with the feeling that your survival depends on something unthinkable. Now, imagine that this something is human flesh. This was the distorted reality of Marc Sappington, a young man from Kansas City who became known as the Kansas City Vampire. His name echoed through newspapers and TV programs, not only for the heinous crimes he committed, but for the surreal and disturbing justification he gave. He believed that he had to eat people in order to stay alive. It wasn't a metaphor. It wasn't a cynical excuse. To him, it was an unquestionable fact, an inner command screaming in his mind. Marc grew up like any other kid in the neighborhood, the son of an ordinary family with no record of extreme violence, but with signs that, for those paying attention, already revealed dangerous cracks in his psyche. He was always quiet, reserved, and according to those who knew him, carried a restlessness in his eyes that few could explain. Yet no one could have imagined what was happening inside his mind. What led this young man, seemingly normal, to cross the line into the unimaginable? What happens inside the mind of someone who believes that the death of others is the only way to guarantee his own survival? These questions make us reflect on the thin line between reality and delusion, between instinct and madness. Marc's case is one of the most bizarre in American crime history, not only because of the brutality of his acts, but because of the explanation he gave. He didn't kill out of hatred, revenge, or even sadistic pleasure. He killed because his mind told him that it was a matter of survival. And this is where we realize how the human mind, when deformed, can transform absurdity into absolute truth. The world came to know Marc Sappington in 2001, but his story began long before in the shadows of his youth, shadows marked by heavy drug use, loneliness, and above all, a mind already showing signs of collapse. His morbid fascination with violence, mixed with psychotic outbursts, gave birth to what would later be called the Kansas City Vampire. When we try to understand Marc Sappington, we encounter a web of psychological layers. He was not just a common killer. He was the reflection of a mind at war with itself. From a young age, Marc displayed signs of mental instability, depression, outbursts of rage, moments of paranoia. All of this was worsened by the constant use of hallucinogenic drugs like PCP, which distort reality and plunge the user into terrifying delusions. During interrogations, Marc revealed that he heard voices. These voices were not simple whispers. They were clear, relentless orders, convincing him that if he didn't obey, he would die. Imagine living imprisoned within your own mind, manipulated by commands that arise from nowhere and feel more real than the words of anyone around you. For Marc, the idea of eating human flesh was not a desire. It was a matter of life and death. Here lies the crucial point. When the mind believes something, no matter how absurd, the body obeys. Forensic psychologists who analyzed the case stated that Marc suffered from paranoid schizophrenia, made even worse by his constant drug use. This combination is explosive. Schizophrenia already deeply distorts perception, and drugs intensify these hallucinations to unimaginable levels. In April 2001, Marc's delusions reached their peak. He believed he was surrounded by invisible forces, that his life was under imminent threat, and that only an act of extreme violence could keep him alive. It was in this dark state of mind that he committed the crimes that would forever mark him as the Kansas City Vampire. Criminal psychology shows us that people in psychotic states can indeed transform delusions into absolute truths. The human mind, when sick, is capable of creating parallel realities so vivid that no external argument can dismantle them. In Marc's case, the result was one of the most disturbing crimes in American history. It was in an ordinary neighborhood on what seemed like just another day that tragedy began. Marc approached a friend, a young man named Alton Fred Brown, someone he already knew. Without arousing suspicion, he convinced him to come to his house. No one could have imagined that this would be Fred's last day alive. Inside the unsettling silence of that home, Marc transformed. Paranoia dictated his every move. He believed that if he didn't obey the voices echoing in his head, he would collapse and die instantly. Without hesitation, Marc attacked Fred with indescribable brutality. The death was quick, but the horror was just beginning. Consumed by his delusional belief, he mutilated the body and then ingested pieces of flesh. There was no pleasure. There was no satanic ritual or pursuit of power. There was only the desperation of a man convinced that this grotesque act was the only way to survive. The psychological impact of this moment is devastating. For any sane person, the thought is revolting. But for Marc, it was salvation. This contrast reveals how the mind, when warped by illness and drugs, can completely invert the concepts of right and wrong, of life and death. Just days later, the terror would repeat. Marc, still imprisoned by his delusions, committed new murders, cementing his reputation as a human predator and sealing forever the nickname he would carry, the Kansas City Vampire. And it was then that the story grew darker still. The reaction of the community, the discovery of the bodies, and the chilling explanation given by the killer himself. After the first murder, Marc Sappington fell even deeper into his spiral of delusion. The voices in his head, once vague, became more demanding. They didn't just order him to kill again. They reinforced the belief that without human flesh his body would shut down. It was as if every beat of his heart depended on another crime. In a matter of days, Marc attacked more victims. The violence escalated, and each murder only solidified his insane conviction. There was no turning back. His neighbors, who saw him as strange but harmless, could never have imagined they lived next to someone who literally fed on the flesh of his acquaintances. The ordinariness of the neighborhood clashed with the horror unfolding behind closed doors. This contrast forces us to reflect on the invisibility of madness. How often do we live side by side with people who seem merely eccentric, when in fact they are fighting internal wars capable of erupting into irreversible acts? Society has no efficient mechanisms to detect or prevent extreme psychotic breaks like Marc's. He didn't fit the classic stereotype of a monster. He wasn't a shadowy figure prowling in the dark. He was just another young man, lost in his own mind, until his delusions spilled over into blood. As bodies began to appear, police started connecting the dots. Reports of disappearances mixed with accounts of strange behavior. When investigators finally confronted Marc, they faced scenes that scarred their memories forever. And when asked, he didn't deny it. On the contrary, he confessed and gave an explanation that shocked everyone. "I had to do this to survive. If I didn't eat, I would die." This confession horrified the community and sparked a deep debate among psychiatrists, lawyers, and society itself. To what extent can a disturbed mind be held accountable for its actions? Where does illness end and conscious evil begin? When Marc Sappington was brought to trial, prosecutors faced a unique challenge. This wasn't just a case of brutal murder. It was a case steeped in delusion, voices and justifications pulled straight from a nightmare. The nickname Kansas City Vampire was already making headlines, turning the trial into a media spectacle. During the sessions, mental health experts were called to analyze Marc's mind. Many agreed he suffered from paranoid schizophrenia, worsened by drug use. But even within that diagnosis, there were disagreements. How much did he truly understand about what he was doing? Believing he had to eat human flesh to survive did not erase the fact that he lured victims, planned his attacks, and carried them out. This dilemma is common in trials involving severe mental illness. The law must determine whether the accused was capable of distinguishing right from wrong at the time of the crime. In Marc's case, the jury heard chilling testimony from survivors of his attacks and saw evidence of the brutality of his crimes. In the end, justice decided that although his mind was compromised, he was still responsible for his actions. Marc was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. For the legal system, his madness did not absolve him. For the community, the sentence brought some relief, though the emotional scars remained. The trial also exposed a harsh reality. Neglecting mental health can turn seemingly ordinary young people into monsters. How many warning signs were ignored? How many cries for help were silenced by drugs, isolation, and indifference? These questions linger to this day. The case of Marc Sappington has never stopped haunting Kansas City. He didn't become just a criminal. He became a symbol of how the human mind can twist itself, creating its own rules outside the boundaries of logic. His belief that he had to consume human flesh to survive is one of the most extreme examples of psychotic delusion in American criminal history. Today, decades later, his story is still studied in criminology and forensic psychology. Marc became an example of how severe mental illness, drug abuse, and isolation can combine to unleash unprecedented violence. He wasn't looking for fame. He wasn't looking for pleasure. He was simply trying to survive, or so he believed. The legacy of this case forces us to look at mental health differently. The monster the world saw was, first and foremost, a young man lost in his own mind. This doesn't lessen the horror of his crimes, but it shows that behind the brutality was a psychological tragedy. And here lies the final reflection. To what extent do our beliefs shape our reality? If a sick mind can transform absurdity into absolute truth, what about the smaller beliefs we all carry? The case of Marc Sappington is a grim reminder that the human mind is, at the same time, our greatest strength and our deepest weakness. The Kansas City Vampire shows us that true horror is not found only in dark alleys or in the monsters of ghost stories. It can live within ordinary people, hidden behind a timid smile or the silence of a quiet neighbor. The mind, when in collapse, is capable of creating realities that defy all logic. Marc believed he needed to consume human flesh in order to live, and in his mind, this was as real as the air he breathed. This case forces us to reflect on the importance of mental health, on the need to pay attention to warning signs, and on the empathy we must have for those who suffer in silence. Because at some point, perhaps Marc's story could have been prevented, but it wasn't. And today it stands as a brutal warning of what happens when the darkness of the mind is left untreated. And the moral of this story is clear. The greatest horrors do not come from the supernatural, but from the human inability to understand and care for the mind itself. By diving into cases like this, we realize that we are not just listening to stories of crime, but exploring the very limits of what it means to be human. Thank you for watching this video. We ask that you subscribe to our channel and like this video. Also, activate the notification bell so you'll be alerted about our upcoming posts. See you in the next video.